I think it is a perfectly straightforward novel, said Vladimir Nabokov of his novel Pale Fire. Today I'm going to be talking about Pale Fire, the 1962 novel by Vladimir Nabokov. It has been called a masterpiece, the novel of the century, and according to the quote from Mary McCarthy, a prominent critic, from the back of the book, it is a creation of perfect beauty. And you guys, that is all 100% true. This book is genius, and I will live and die by that statement. It is head and shoulders above any other book I read in the past 4 years at least, and I cannot stop myself from just gushing about it. So let's get into it, right? What is this book about? I feel like every review needs to pay lip service to the structure of the book, the basic plot of it. In the world of Pale Fire, you have famous poet, recently deceased, John Shade, who wrote a poem called Pale Fire. Then you have a commentary by Charles Kimboat, who is John Shade's next door neighbor and a fellow scholar at John Shade's University. And that's all you kind of pretty much need to know about the setup or the plot of this book. But as you start reading it, you start with a foreword that Charles Kimboat also wrote to be read before the poem. And right on the very first page of it, in between telling you things that you might expect from a foreword to a critical work, he interjects this line: "There is a very loud amusement park right in front of my present lodgings." And then he goes right back into talking about John Shade's method of composition of the poem. And then you already know from the first page that there is something seriously wrong with Charles Kimboat, and he is probably not to be trusted. And over the course of the novel, he goes from not to be trusted to delusional fan to imposter to lunatic to king bot, maybe? But that's the surface plot of the book. What I love about this book is being in the hands of someone who is a master of their craft. Vladimir Nabokov, I think, was clearly a genius. I mean, it doesn't need to be said because it's been said a million times, but he is a master craftsman. His vocabulary is 100% better than yours or mine, and he is on a mission to communicate some vision of art to you. So strap in, boys and girls, this is a journey. So anyway, every review on this book seems to go into, how do you read this book? Unreliable narrator, metatextual. Do you read the beginning first, then the commentary, then the poem itself like the narrator says? No, you read it front to back. The answer is simple. But then, if you've been paying attention, you'll want to reread parts of it a second time, or a third or a fourth time. And to be real, every page of this book is a gold mine. There is just so much to reward a rereader. One of the things that I really like about this book is the poem itself, Pale Fire. Forget what the New Yorker says, forget what the critics say. Pale Fire as a poem, stands on its own as a masterpiece. I 100% believe that. Nabokov was a poet. He was a Russian poet. He was an English poet. And what I love about the poem also is that it's not ashamed to be poetry, and it's not ashamed to play into the conventions of poetry. It's got a meter, it's got a rhyme, and where it breaks out from its meter, for example, it's for a reason. It's by design. And that also plays into one of the themes of, the poet as the creator of the universe and the distiller of his own vision. I love how parts of this poem make me emotional every time I read it. I'm thinking of Aunt Maud's Paralysis, where they talk about imposters taking the places of cells in her brain. It's just so evocative and human that I think it on its own makes this book worthwhile to read. And there's just something so satisfying and comforting about knowing that you're in the hands of a master wordsmith. Nabokov famously knew how to put words in a sentence and knew how to make things just go, like things just flow effortlessly. The story just goes somewhere. And there's never a point in this book where you're like, oh, that action was a little clunky. Like that description of that sequence of events was a little hiccupy, where a lesser writer would have stumbled over their words or sentences. That never happens in this book. He knows how to just conjure the image and put it straight in your brain. And I love that I can trust the narrative will do that for me. I wanted to save the end of this video for my absolute gushing over Nabokov, but it's coming out already. I fucking love that guy. That guy is the ultimate literary demiurge for me. He knew how to write. Like, I love you, Vladimir Nabokov. It's a common thing, I think, that reading Nabokov will spoil you for all other writers, and that's definitely been the case with me, because there's no one like him, no one's on his level. Back to Pale Fire. So there have been, I think, a couple of common criticisms of this book over the years, that it's pretentious, that it's a coy joke, that it's devoid of meaning, and I'm going to spend the rest of this video addressing each of those in turn. So first, it's pretentious, or you're just not smart enough for it. There, I said it, okay? Like, you know when you're hearing a joke and you don't get the context, so you don't get the joke? This book presumes that you have the context. So if you don't have the context, that's on you as a reader. And I will say that I do not speak French and I do not speak Russian, which are the two languages that Nabokov likes to use untranslated in his works. And I do think that knowing one, or hopefully both of those, will give you more, or you will be able to get more on a first read of this novel, but I think it's not necessary. I do think that it does reward the reader who is aware of literary tropes, who is aware of famous authors and cliches, the allusions that he makes, that will allow a reader to take more out of a read of this book. That's what makes this book so rewarding, because there's always another layer to peel back. There's always another reference to follow up on. It's, understandable on its own, on its face, but if you want to delve deeper into it, you can. And I felt like I've learned so much from following up the references and revealing further layers of understanding, and that has made this book, that much closer to my heart. It's a joke. Yeah, it's a joke, and we readers are the butt of it. Nabokov loves to play with the idea of the individual as the creator of the universe. So John Shade obviously is the poet. He's the creator of his universe. He is perceiving and transcribing the world, see forward. And that's obvious, and that's communicated to you clearly. But there's also the fact that Kimboat is also taking apart the world and putting it back together, taking apart Shade's poem and putting it back together in a way that coincides with his reality. He's creating his own reality, right? And then there's the third layer of us, the readers, as we're reading this book, and we have to take the poem and the commentary and the synthesis that Nabokov has put together and that he is the ultimate creator of, and create a third reality for ourselves. And part of that reality is made with our cooperation. So that's why this book is often called postmodern or metatextual. And I think that is also why this book has generated so much scholarly ink, because there is a certain kind of reader that loves to figure out the book and try to figure out what is the real truth that Nabokov is trying to make here. And that's ultimately the joke that is being played on us as readers. He is keeping us guessing. He is making us, comb through this book, follow the references. We are being toyed with. We are toys, which is part of the theme and part of the point of this book, right? That games of coincidence and being the butt of a joke that the universe is playing on you is evidence of the existence of a design and of some other force or power that is out there. And if you like that kind of mindfuck, this book is really for you. And lastly, the meaning of this book. So I think the argument that Pale Fire doesn't have meaning, it's just an empty joke, comes from the fact that this narrative is very absurd. The narrator is arguably delusional. And you can just say, at the end of the day, it was all a dream, or he was crazy the entire time, or none of it was real. And it's very tempting to go from that to this book didn't have a point to it. But that is not true. I truly think that Pale Fire has many things to say about life, the meaning of life, death, art, love, desire, the past, the really important questions of life. And part of it is bound up not just in the words, like the semantic meaning of the text, but in the structure, right? In the texture of the book. The fact that there are layers upon layers of in-jokes and doubles and anagrams and reflections of things from previous parts of the book. That is a cohesive exploration of the theme of chance and coincidence and counterpoint. But that also requires, I think, us as readers to pay attention and put some of our own blood and sweat into this book. Nabokov said in his lectures on literature, real literature, must not be gulped down like some potion which may be good for the heart or good for the brain. Literature must be taken and broken to bits, pulled apart, squashed. Then its lovely wreath will be smelt in the hollow of the palm. It will be munched and rolled upon the tongue with relish. Then and only then, its rare flavor will be appreciated at its true worth, and the broken and crushed parts will again come together in your mind and disclose the beauty of a unity to which you have contributed something of your own blood. I definitely feel like I contributed some of my own blood and brain matter to digesting this book, and I think that's why this book has more meaning for me than any other book I've read in my life. And now I'm going to go through a couple of parts of Pale Fire that I think display some of its excellence, the exuberance of its language, and show why it's completely worth a read. In line 803 of the poem Pale Fire, it reads, "Life everlasting, based on a misprint. 2 dactyls followed by spondees, separated by a caesura." This is Nabokov saying, pay attention. This is the important part. You know, when the meter is so arresting like that. And yeah, this is the climax of the poem. And I love that he begins that section with such a unique and eye-catching, ear-catching meter. Although Kimboat says that he's not a poet, not a rhymester at multiple points in his commentary, it's pretty clear he is quite talented and kind of a poet in his own right. There are many parts of the prose commentary which have internal rhymes, alliteration, and assonances that just make you stop and want to reread that part again. There's one part where it's on page 167 of my edition, where he says, "How curious that our rationality feels satisfied when we plump for the first explanation, though actually the scientific and the supernatural, the miracle of the muscle and the miracle of the mind, are both inexplicable, as are all the ways of our Lord." I think it's just beautiful. When he describes the escape from the palace, there's a moment where the king drops his flashlight. As he began fumbling among its vertical folds for some sort of ingress, the weak light of his torch rolled its hopeless eye and went out. It's just so evocative. And then just an example of some of the humor in Pale Fire. On page 199, he describes a teenage boy named Gordon. And Gordon's wearing shorts that he describes in different ways 4 times over the course of 2 pages. They're first described as a leopard-spotted loincloth, then black bathing trunks, then half a page later, white tennis shorts, and then finally he's again wearing a Tarzan brief. In conclusion, read Pale Fire. It's really good. You will be doing yourself a favor.